There are many ways to tell the history of an institution which started over 30 years ago. It started as an informal, ad hoc, women's-only seminar, that is 1971, and eventually this became known as the Oxford Women's Social Anthropology Seminar. It came together in what was the basement of the Oxford Institute of Social Anthropology, ISCA, evolving over time into the International Gender Studies Centre at Lady Margaret Hall, as it is known today, that is in 2013, when we are celebrating an important anniversary. 30 years have passed since the formal establishment of the Centre for Cross-Cultural Research on Women, the predecessor of IGS, when it was then affiliated to Queen Elizabeth's House, then at the address of St. Giles, number 21. There is foremost the central mission of IGS. Through our various core activities, research, teaching, publishing, we seek to cast gender-centered and gender-critical perspectives on any given subject matter, always with an understanding, important to us, of the imperative for the researcher, critical self-reflexivity, always with an understanding of the impact of our intervention, however benign in intent, and how this might throw into relief ethics, responsibility, and vulnerability in all these complex environments in which we observe, interpret, and provide findings. Attention to transformative knowledge production and research. Attention to methodology and method, to collaborative and partnership-based approaches characterize much of what we do. And this can be said in regard to the Centre's most recent, current research program. The IGS research program focused on gender, health and education in Burma was inspired by our patron, Aung San Suu Kyi. On the occasion of her 2012 visit to Oxford to receive her honorary doctorate, she exhorted her old university to engage with educational institutions, foremost with Yangon University, and make use of Oxford privileges of knowledge and resources to do some good. IGS, with the support of LMH, has become part of Oxford's Burma portfolio. And given the mission and objectives of our centre, we seek to apply principles and methodology of evidence-based transformative research. At the same time as we are aware of the challenges such travelling, knowledge, imagination, history and resources must entail. But there's no other way to construct meaningful collaborative partnerships. Here I give you images from the preparatory Burma trip, a trip I undertook in March, April of this year. What it also illustrates is the importance of process to us. That is process from the conception of the research project, the research itself, and into how it spills over into seminars, into workshops, importantly into publications. These are mere glimpses of the multiple conversations that constitute Myanmar's development narrative, whether government, UNICEF initiatives for reform of educational sector, the dynamic women's groups such as META, a local NGO, or Baptist NGOs working against gender-based violence, or a retired Yangon University librarian and intellectual participating in Dole Su's educational initiatives, and lastly, a parliamentarian who left academe to assert her voice in the regional parliament. I conclude with some selected visual markers of diverse narratives of development. Returned students in an alternative arts gallery with whom I held very lively conversations. Faculty of the Baptist Institute of Theology who impressed me with their extraordinary syllabus. And a woman worshipping at a shrine in the Shadagon Pagoda in Yangon. The following photos from our past, but also recent and current years, allow only glimpses of the varied activities which form our core program. Lastly, the numerous workshops for which IGS has become so well known. This Women and War workshop you're seeing here, held at Lady Margaret Hall, is one of 4 workshops held in the last 18 months alone. What drives the centre is research, first and foremost research. It is the members' research which sparks ideas for seminars, conferences, generates new members, produces new publications, and engenders the stimulating atmosphere characteristic of IGS. The multi-stranded IGS narrative can thus most meaningfully be told through the diverse voices of its members. This has become the multi-voice narrative to which many of our members have been able to contribute their respective stories.
My name is Deborah Bryson. I'm an economic geographer and sociologist by training. One of the first books I published was on African women peasant farmers, entitled Women Wielding the Hoe. Since then, I've been researching the proliferation of types of work that people are engaging in to earn cash in the face of declining returns to African peasant agriculture. Most recently, I've been intensively researching the heavily male-dominated artisanal mining of gold and diamonds in East Africa. Women are engaged primarily in gold processing, involving drudgerous rock crushing. In 2012, my DFID-funded research project hosted cultural festivals for Tanzanian secondary school students living in mining settlements who were asked to express themselves artistically regarding what it's like to live in a mining settlement. I will end with some of their artwork.
I'm Shirley Ardner, who started the centre with Helen Calloway and other colleagues. Today I've chosen 3 pictures of Cameroonian women marching on Women's Day because they all belong to the microcredit clubs which I study. IGS has held 2 3-year link programmes, one of which brought here my Cameroonian colleague, Professor Joyce Ndeli, in red, and her staff, while I made and still make visits to her department at Buya. Dr. Margaret Niger Thomas in blue represents for me the amazing visiting fellows we've received at IGS. A young study fellow when with us, Margaret is now a senior member of the Ministry of Women's Affairs. Field work took me and Margaret on a muddy main road north. The Fon of Issou, with his wives and courtiers, is where I lived in a mud hut when researching for a book on the effect of the plantation economy on rural areas. Edwin and I also work with the Wovia Islanders, who used to spear whales from such canoes. From the start, output has been important. The book and the poster represents the steady stream, indeed hundreds, of publications by members of the Centre.
Reading de Beauvoir at the Sorbonne, Paris, I arrived at Oxford a feminist and became the first woman member of the Oxford Union. After a BA in PPE, I completed a Cambridge postgrad anthropology course with Edmund Leach, my mentor. A chance research position was to facilitate long-term fieldwork on gypsy sites, my Oxford doctorate and emergent monograph. Subsequent research included my terrifying boarding school, Normandy farmers, and ethnographic fieldwork methods. My latest book, Anthropological Practice, draws on dialogues with anthropologists of 16 nationalities who've done fieldwork around the globe.
My association with IGAs goes back to my time as a graduate student when I used to attend their seminars. Just before I became a full member of the center, I was senior lecturer and head of research at the University of Addis Ababa for over 6 years. The book is about female and male street children and youth gang members. It provides detailed descriptions and analysis of how such children interact. Gang members were not abandoned children. They had abandoned their families. Gang life did not provide the nurturing or emotionally supporting atmosphere they sought. The study shows how their lives were negatively affected when they reached adulthood. The book also provides empirical evidence of a reverse reality, with even 10-year-old children assuming the role of homemakers, breadwinners, and parenting their parents. The crucial aspect of the book is that it delved into children's sexuality, as well as how masculinity and masculine ideals of being female and male are formed and shared by both sexes.
My research enthusiasm is how people adapt to difficult environments, especially in semi-arid North Africa and the Middle East. My doctoral thesis was on water, settlement, and migration in central Sudan. Here's a landscape in black and white. I then worked broadly in development on malaria control in the Emirates for NGOs in Egypt and Jordan, for international agencies, and DFID as a social development advisor leading on gender. I relish joining IGS, re-engaging with former interests, co-editing Gender, Water and Development, Gender and Family among Mobile Professionals. Most fun has been deepening earlier research on debased traditional wind tower houses, showing how the airflow through these architectural features ameliorated the harsh summer climate long before electricity. Adapting their principles now can and is contributing hope for an energy-scarce future.
My name is Elena Fidin-Kosmia, and I'm Departmental Lecturer at the Oxford Department for International Development. In particular, my research is focused on the intersections between gender, Islam, and protracted refugee situations. In particular, I've conducted research with Sahrawi refugees who live in refugee camps in southwest Algeria, having originated from the Western Sahara in northwest Africa. Refugee camps are typically perceived as militarized and patriarchal spaces, and yet the Sahrawi refugee camps have consistently been represented as ideal in nature, uniquely secular and democratic spaces, characterized not only by gender equality, but even a total absence of violence against women. The main focus of my work has been to explore how, why, and to what effect such idealized depictions have been projected onto the international arena. I argue that secularism and the empowerment of Sahrawi refugee women have been strategically invoked to secure the humanitarian and political support of Western state and non-state actors who ensure the continued survival of the Sahrawi refugee camps and their inhabitants.
My first fieldwork was in Busso, a village in Molise, southern Italy, looking at ethnicity and migration, in particular to the brickworks around Bedford in the UK. I lived in the village for 13 months, taking part in the agricultural and household tasks, the ceremonial events, and as part of a specific housing cluster, with all the rights and obligations that entailed. People spoke dialect rather than Italian, and used the seigneurial families to mediate the demands of the wider society. The same strategies were then used in England with the similarly foreign language of English. The opportunity to conduct classic ethnography over a long period with a large sample, a village of 1,400 people, provided me with a strong baseline for my current longitudinal study on Busso and the changes over the last nearly 40 years. When they lived there in the 1970s, I wondered what the future would bring for Busso. I had no idea of the advent and impact of mobile phones, the internet, and cheap flights. Quick visits between countries of migrant family members are now possible. The preschool nursery has become an old people's home. Major EU funding is to expand the cemetery. Young people are now free to kiss and court in public.
As I conducted anthropological fieldwork in and near Venice in the 1980s, I focused on women's crafts, economically essential in situations of poverty and underdevelopment. I found that women's work was based on a strictly gendered ideology of sexual purity that kept them away from more secure factory work. But I also witnessed a great deal of change. In 2000, I was called to take over the directorship of the center at a difficult time, a time of change in Queen Elizabeth House. I'm happy to say that with support from QEH's affiliations committee, I succeeded in strengthening the center and I secured its future by including 5 new research associates. At present, I conduct research on women partisans in World War II, and I'm writing an essay on anthropological notions of humor.
I came up to LMH in 1958 to read geography. In 1960, I was a member of the Oxford University Women's Expedition to the Azores, the first women's expedition. We still meet since 2011 every year. I still do field work in many parts of the world. In April 2013, I was awarded a prize for a lifetime's work in rural geography by the Association of American Geographers. I've worked to publish books, both authored and edited, to give scholars for whom English is not a first language access to a wider readership. Then, in 2013, to commemorate 100 years of Women Fellows of the RGS, I was chosen as one of the 7, and here at the stand with my colleagues from Spain and the US, with whom I founded the International Geographical Union Commission on Gender in 1988.
I started my working life with women's organizations, spending 3 years working with ISIS, Women's International Cross-Cultural Exchange, based in Uganda. The organization has a feminist information and documentation center and a flagship program called the Exchange Program, which enables women from different countries to share information and experiences on a shared set of issues, and to build up international solidarity networks through which to take forward their work. It is an organization which seeks to work with and to support women working together as a movement. My roots in the international women's movement have shaped my work and thinking ever since, and through IGS, we have been able to bring together women and men from the world of international development to talk about how to help people working on gender in international development, an area crippled by frameworks and the managerialism that underpins them. The book, A Perfect Storm, and the workshops around it have tried to reconnect the work of people working on gender in development organizations to the realities of women's lives.
CREA Women's Group from Spain would like to congratulate IGS for 30 years of developing and inspiring work on issues of gender injustice and discrimination through research, writing, teaching, and social engagement.
In my 2 years at IGS, I have been busy with field research in Liberia, as well as coordinating a seminar series called Gender and Propaganda. In Liberia, I live and work in partnership with host families of small organizations, and my research teammates and I approach individuals to ask them their opinions about gender-based violence, which is a serious issue in post-war Liberia. It's a great way for the interviewees to have a lot of control over the topic of research being discussed, and it's also a wonderful way to meet a lot of really exciting people.
I hope that my research can help to promote African voices on this issue and to encourage people to think otherwise about violence in Africa.
My name is Basma Abdel Mohsen Al Mutlaq. I'm a Saudi women's rights activist and a researcher. I have a PhD in comparative feminist literature from the School of Oriental and African Studies in London. In 2004, I became a visiting fellow at IGS, where I developed a special interest in gender dynamics in the Gulf states. When I returned to Saudi, women were still marginalized and treated as minors. And during my years working as a professor there, I saw how institutions have outwardly been modernized yet are entrenching gender segregation and inequality. So I started writing, blogging, and speaking at conferences on calls for reforms of gender discriminatory laws and practices. I've also been focusing on how socio-political changes over the last 50 years have been treated in Saudi women's literature and how women writers have emerged from the obscurity of the 1960s and 70s to international acclaim and awards and translation contracts in recent years, shattering the myth of the silent and submissive Saudi woman. In 2012, I was appointed a member of the World Economic Forum, and most recently I became an associate member of IGS Lady Margaret Hall, Oxford University.
From all the references I might provide on my many years of fieldwork, research, and teaching on China, a central thread has been the change I experienced in the relational nature of cross-cultural ethnography involving the subject of the researcher in engagement with others, such as the women of Shunzhe from traditions of spinsterhoods in southern China who became aunts, sisters, and co-storytellers, such as Juma, a retired nurse and Cantonese opera lover who became my adopted mother and interpreter of traditional spinsterhoods. These conversations became studies of family relations, gender hierarchies, and women's informal power, such as Shui Jingjun, my collaborator and friend of many years, with whom I worked on women's role in organized Islam and women's mosques in central China. I'm continuing collaboration using approaches from ethnomusicology to salvage Xinge, Islamic chants, as part of women's mosque traditions, a precious conduit to women's lives of past eras, as with Li Xiangrong's lament over loss, pain, and faith.